Good morning. Welcome, everyone. And may we dedicate this Dharma Talk to the well-being of all beings everywhere. The title of our Dharma Talk today is How to Avoid Reality. And of course, you don't need instructions on how to avoid reality. We all have been in school learning that for the last many decades, most of us. Are we able to get Kelvin up, Eric? Okay, so here's our friend Kelvin. Even though he's a very young man, he's struggling every day with reality, taking it in little bits, if at all. We addressed this topic 2 weeks ago, and at that time we talked about how we avoid reality by getting distracted in the endless opportunities in our world today, electronic and otherwise. And even when we're meditating on the cushion or at a retreat, we find that we have within us the world's greatest entertainment center. Requires no batteries, you don't have to plug it in, no passwords. Right there it is within us. But today I want to talk about a more fundamental way that we avoid reality, a more basic way that we don't even see 99.9% of the time. What do I mean by reality? Well, reality not in a metaphysical sense of some ultimate abstract reality, but reality in the sense of our present moment experience, our tangible experience that we touch with the senses, seeing, hearing, feeling the body, tasting, smelling, being present to this, because this is what we call our life. This is what we call reality. This is what we call the world that we live in. But as we see and hear and feel, sense, taste, we interpret that through the mind. We put labels on our experience. And as we do, gradually we separate ourselves from that direct experience. We may say, I'm eating an apple. I've eaten hundreds of apples. This is just another apple. And in so doing, we lose the taste. We lose the experience of this apple, of this moment. We experience our life much more through concepts than through direct experience. I'm thinking of a time, I'm not necessarily proud of this, but I think we can all relate to it one way or another. When we were kids and maybe had clubs or groups, and in order to get into our club, you had to go through an initiation process. And in our club, in order to join, you had to eat a worm, a live worm. So imagine you're being initiated into our club. You're required to close your eyes. Actually, we blindfold you. We hold your hands behind your back. Open your mouth. And into your open mouth, we drop 2 cold strands of spaghetti. And of course, people will choke and scream, and yet if they knew what they were eating, they wouldn't even blink an eye, you see. So the experience that we have is based far more on what we believe and what concepts we're using to interpret our experience than the experience itself. I was at the other end of this one time. I was in Texas. Somebody invited me to a bowl of chili, which I consumed quite rapidly. It was really good. I was about to ask for another one, and I said, well, what kind of meat do you use? And they said, this is rattlesnake chili. I thought, well, maybe I'll just stick with one bowl. And for the rest of the day, I could hear this hissing sound that wouldn't leave me alone. So food is one example, but seeing and hearing and all of our experiences are colored the same way. We interpret and then live according to our interpretations. So in a more erudite fashion, I want to talk for just a minute. I won't stay erudite for too long. But this is a reading from William James, an American philosopher. And in his book, Some Problems of Philosophy, he says, if my reader can succeed in avoiding all conceptual understanding and interpretation and lapse into his immediate sensible life at this very moment. Of course, that's what we've been doing. That's what we call bare attention, direct awareness of our experience. He will find it to be what someone has called a big, blooming, buzzing confusion. And of course, when we experience life directly, we don't experience patterns and understandings. We just experience hearing, feeling, seeing, sensing, and so forth. Individuals that have been blind since birth and then have had their vision restored via surgery, they do not open their eyes and say, oh, there's a chair, and there's Victor, and there's Ricky, and so forth. They have no idea what they're looking at. In fact, they become overwhelmed and have to cover their face. And so very gradually they have to learn how to conceptualize and understand the world around us. And these concepts are tied very closely to our language. So we see something, we give it a concept via the language, and so the language, the concepts, structure our life, generally speaking, much more than the actual experience itself. So if we're told that we're eating worms and we believe it, it doesn't matter what we're eating, we're going to respond as if we're eating worms, you see. I continue with William James. Out of this aboriginal sensible muchness, he calls it, attention carves out objects with concepts that names and identifies forever. In the sky we see constellations. I'm going to digress a minute again. Have you ever seen the Big Dipper? Well, everybody says, yes, of course, I've seen the Big Dipper. There's no Big Dipper. You could search the universe forever and you won't find a Big Dipper. But can you look at the sky without seeing the Big Dipper or without looking for it? I can't, you see. Big Dipper is simply a concept, yet it's a concept that we can't get rid of. And so our seeing is overlaid by our thinking. Or if we look at a map of the United States or North America even through a satellite image, immediately we're putting states on there. Oh, there's where I live, you see. We're putting countries that don't exist. If you look at the map, it's not there. If you look at the photograph, I should say, it's not there. So we carve out constellations. We carve out in the earth beach, sea, bushes, waves. Out of time, we cut days and nights, summers, winters. We name each part of the sensible continuum, and all these abstractions are but concepts. He says the mental life of humans consists almost wholly, almost entirely, in substituting a conceptual order for the perceptual order from which his experiences originally come. So we wind up living from the map rather than from the territory, so to speak. We have a primal sensory experience, and then we wrap it up. We label it. And then we relate to that label, to that concept, rather than to the experience itself. And then, of course, we string the concepts together like a string of pearls, and we have a story. We have a story about who I am and about who you are, and about what life is all about. And all of this comes out of a group of concepts that we've created based upon our interpretation of our reality, what we call our reality. And in fact, we have divorced ourselves from reality. We live as much, if not more, in the mind than in the actual experience of reality. And that was because my mother and dad typically fed me canned vegetables. And I just didn't like vegetables. But then summer came, and I could eat fresh vegetables, which was very, very different, you see. Fresh sweet corn is very, very different than canned corn, you see. And green beans that you can snap and vegetables, you see. But for much of my life, I didn't realize there was even a difference between canned vegetables and the vegetable itself. And I asked my dad, why do we can vegetables? Of course, he explained to me it was basically for economic reasons. If you have fresh vegetables, they're good for 4 or 5 days maybe. You better sell them and eat them pretty quickly. Put them in a can, you can store them for years in a warehouse and you can sell them. We pay a price for that, but nonetheless, it serves our economy, it serves our the way we live our life. Well, we do much the same thing to our experiences, you see. We originally eat fresh vegetables, but pretty soon we start putting labels on those experiences. And when we do that, it's like canning that experience. So I have an experience of an apple, and then I can it, and I label it apple. And then from there on out, I'm talking about that particular apple, you see. I'm talking about the concept. There's a article I read one time that was written by the baker at Green Gulch Temple in California. It's a Zen temple community. And the title of the article was on making the perfect biscuit. Every morning he would wake up and make biscuits, and he prided himself in the biscuits he made, but he could never quite make the perfect biscuit. It was always something was missing. It just didn't taste right. Then after several years of this, of sort of beating himself up for not being a good enough cook, he realized what he was doing was every biscuit he ate, he was comparing with Mom's biscuits from when he was 5 years old or 6 years old, you see. And he could never replicate Mom's biscuits, and never did. Once he had that insight, he began to eat this biscuit rather than Mom's biscuit. And he realized that every biscuit was wonderful. It was a little different each time, but it was still wonderful. And that's what happens when we can things and label them with concepts. We're constantly trying to replicate the past. And life doesn't work that way. It doesn't work very well that way. We've tried it for a long time. So what's the solution? Is the solution to avoid concepts, to avoid language? You know, we can't very well do that. In fact, we couldn't do it if we tried. You know, look at the sky and say, don't look at the Big Dipper. You can't not do it. Once it's there, it's automatic. But what we can do is to begin to discern the basic experience from the concept. We can separate this biscuit from Mom's biscuits. We can realize this is an experience, this is the concept that immediately overlays it. So we're separating the map from the territory, as it were, or the menu from the meal, or however you want to put it metaphorically. There's nothing wrong with concepts. In fact, we need concepts in order to communicate. You know, if I want to communicate about how good an apple was, I use the word apple, you see, which is convenient. But the point is, we've never eaten an apple. We've eaten this apple, this thing we have in our hand. You see, we don't see a tree, we see this tree. We don't see a person, we see this person. But all too often we see people according to the label that the mind puts on. Teacher, minister, you know, president, policeman, whatever the case might be. And we react according to that concept rather than according to this particular person or this particular apple. I think most of us know what an amphibian is, like frogs and salamanders and other things like that are born in water. They live in the water and breathe through gills, take oxygen out of the water for the first part of their life, and then they let go of their gills, develop lungs, and breathe air and live on both the water and the land. Which is, I just was fascinated by this because it's sort of like the whole evolutionary process, just in the life of one frog. When I was little, I used to catch tadpoles, watch them develop their legs and turn into little frogs. I was always fascinated by them. Well, we can do much the same thing. When we're very, very young, we're like the tadpole swimming in the water. All we know is pure sensation when we're young. But as we get older, we develop concepts, we develop language, we develop a sense of self. And little by little, we're taught to relate to the label on the can rather than to the experience itself. And so it's possible, and that's really, I think, one of the skills we develop in this practice is the ability to experience both the water and the land, as it were, to experience both the raw experience of feeling and tasting, and yet at the same time to be able to communicate effectively. When we do this, as we do this, you'll discover that you feel much more alive. You'll have more energy, and you'll be less concerned about what happened yesterday or what may happen tomorrow or the next moment. But you'll learn to be fully alive. I should say relearn to be fully alive in each and every moment. And so you'll be eating fresh vegetables instead of canned vegetables. You'll be living your life rather than somebody else's life. This experience will not eliminate pain or pleasure, either one. In fact, it will intensify both, but it will eliminate suffering. So by becoming more alive, we actually eliminate our suffering, because the suffering is based upon our experience of a concept. The concept says that life should be a certain way. When life is not this way, then there's suffering. But when there's only the fresh vegetables, when there's only this, And when I'm not trying to make this anything other than what it is, life is rich. I want to close with this poem, a wonderful poem, one of my favorites, by Derek Walcott. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and will each smile at the other's welcome and say, sit, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, and I'll add, give fresh vegetables. Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf. Take down the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. Let's sit for just a moment. And maybe we end with gratitude for the Dharma, for the Sangha, for the Buddha within all of us. So it is.
Eric has placed up an overlay that has ways that you can help the folks in Texas. So many are suffering so terribly right now. And so we have provided several websites or places that you can go to find out what you can do to offer some form of assistance. And so we want to leave that up as we close with Rochelle playing her beautiful music on the Rav drum. And so as we finish our day, I would say peace and blessings, but since vegetables were so much a part of our topic, I will say, may we wish upon the world peace and harmony.
you touch it.